On episode 336 of the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, we meet Niles Birbaumer and discuss his book, Your Brain Knows More Than You Think. You can find the full show notes for this episode at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/336. Have you decided you're ready to make a change? To reclaim your health and fitness? The 40 Plus Fitness Podcast is here for you. I'm your host, Alan Meisner. I'm an NSAM certified personal trainer with a specialization in corrective exercise and fitness nutrition. Let me be your coach as you find your way on your health and fitness journey. All right, let's go. Our guest today is really kind of a fascinating guy. He works with some of the most amazing people in the world from the perspective of understanding the brain and how it's all wired together. Very interesting conversation. He has done a lot to help a lot of people, albeit some of his methods have been a little bit controversial and maybe a little bit extreme, but a very, very interesting conversation. I know you're going to enjoy learning a lot about how your brain works today. With no further ado, here's Niles Birbaumer. So Dr. Birbaumer, thank you so much for being a part of 40 Plus Fitness. How are you?
Perfect.
You know, your book, Your Brain Knows More Than You Think, was not the book I thought I was going to read when I started reading it. I mean, I know, okay, neuroplasticity is a topic that I'm very fascinated by because as we get older, we kind of feel like maybe we should decline a little bit. Maybe we should let our brains go a little bit. But we also know if we work our brains, it's like a muscle and it should get stronger.
Sure. But even if it gets weaker in age, it gets stronger on other edges.
Yes. And that's what I really took from your book was that our brain is actually a very, very interesting organ in what it can do to change us. What I took from the book was we're not fixed. And I think we all like to think we're fixed, but we're not fixed.
Exactly.
We can change.
Right. At any time.
Yes. So
at
now,
any time, in any direction.
And that's what was kind of fascinating about the book was the stories and the things that you put together to kind of say that. And I think it came down to this concept of what you call desired effect. And it's the first time I've really ever heard someone put it that way, to say we all want something. Our brain or our bodies or our minds, our being wants something. And as long as we're getting that, we will keep doing the things that help us get that.
Yes.
And if we're not getting that, then we have to change. So kind of get into the concept of what desired effect means to our brain and why that drives our behavior so strongly.
Well, there is a circuit in the brain which is extremely sensitive to reward, any type of reward. Could be internal, thought reward, image reward, but mostly it's external reward. And that circuit drives us forwards. And it reactivates all the time. It constantly asks, is this wish fulfilled? Where should I go? Is there a chance that I get this? So it's what we call the will system. That system usually is extremely active during the whole life. But I described in the book several conditions like complete paralysis, diverse illnesses, meditation type experiences where that circuit is stopped or degenerates or is eliminated, or the muscles are completely paralyzed, so the brain learns that it cannot will anything because nothing of its wishes will be fulfilled. And even then, if all your possibilities which you imagined during your life are blocked off, are completely blocked forever, the brain adapts, and at the end of that adaptation process, these people, I'm talking here about completely paralyzed people as an example, but there are many others, these people have a high quality of life, meaning that even if the central brain circuit of wishful thinking, which drives us forward, is degenerating or blocked, or the external world does not allow the fulfillment of our desires, even then the brain adapts and you can have a high quality of life in such a situation.
And I
That's
think,
one of the topics.
And that was, the locked in syndrome was something I had never heard of before. And so it was really kind of fascinating to think about, okay, here's the situation where, this individual has zero control over anything around them. And now their brain is adapting to try to find a way, anyway, to affect change in their lives. And most of us, we have so much capacity for change in our lives. We choose not to.
Right. That's right. Because we're driven by the environment.
We're driven by the environment. And
usually,
again, that's where this whole concept of neuroplasticity in saying, okay, what are the things we want? Because when we say desired effect, I think everyone would want to eat healthy, to exercise, to do the things we know we should be doing for our health. But our brain has different answers for us than what we might want. So it's desired effect, but the brain has its own kind of desire.
Well, that's the desires and most of the plastic changes the brain does are not conscious. That's why you name it. It's the brain who does different things that I want. But the brain is you. You are your brain. So the two, you are, the brain is you. But the brain has the body, which is hanging on to this brain. And most of these processes of wishful thinking and fulfillment and everything you do in your life, these processes, 90% of these processes are not conscious. That's why you think it's not you, because the brain then decides, assuming you get paralyzed for some reason or another, you're paralyzed, and then the brain doesn't need your conscious. You think this is a catastrophe for my life, this is terrible, this is the end of my life. But meanwhile, the brain adapts to the loss of that circuit, this willful circuit, and develops a new strategy to quiet down different areas of the brain. And at the end, you will experience the end result of that plastic process. But don't think that you are different from your brain. You are your brain. But your brain often does things which you don't know of, and it does it very often on a long-term basis, so it adapts to long-term things, and you will not know of that adaptation process until the end, when it becomes conscious. That could last a few days, a few seconds, but it could also last several years. Like in my patient at the beginning, they say, oh, well, I will kill myself. I cannot live in such a condition. And after a year of this adaptation process, then say, oh, now I'm really happy. And I'm completely paralyzed. I'm on artificial respiration and feeding. I can do nothing, but I feel very good. And that is an end result of such an adaptation process.
Yeah, and I think it's really hard for us to accept that we can change that much.
Yes, it is difficult to accept. But on the other hand, it's the only thing we should give us hope to get out of misery.
Yes. Now, you took that conversation in the book and you went into changing personality. And this was an area where I thought, okay, he's going to lose me here because, like I think everybody else, and as you mentioned in the book, I think my personality was pretty much set. And I was not raised by my father. So when I met my father, I was actually very, very surprised by how much I was like him.
Yes.
And you get into the book about twins that have been separated at birth. And so I'm looking at it from a different, father, son, and some of the aspects of my personality that are very similar to his. Can you kind of talk about how our brains create personality and what that actually means with regards to neuroplasticity?
First of all the circuits in the brain who create what we call personality are circuits which in principle are plastic. Of course, they are created by the genetic upbringing. So when you are similar like your father, that's not surprising. And there was an excellent study in the US in the 60s and 70s where monozygotic and dizygotic twins who were raised apart for more than 20 years were brought together in St. Paul, Minnesota. And they all stick together. It was the last time that this happened in history because now these type of twins cannot be separated anymore. So in that study, the main result was, of course, if the environment in which people live and these separated twins like you from your father lived, if the environment was, roughly similar, they developed similar. If the environment was completely different, they developed differently. The main genetic factor, which was similar in both, even if they were separated, was a thing which we usually, a personality factor which we usually don't ascribe to personality. It was political opinion. So the genetic root of what we call political opinion is much, much higher than all the other similarities you have. So that means the similarities with your father are mainly similarities, of course, in appearance, but what you call your personality, you are probably completely different from your father, except that your political opinion probably is the same. But you know that political opinions and political ideas can be easily learned and relearned, and the brain can under different environmental circumstances, can completely change these opinions. So here we have the most plastic attitude which we think in life, which is political opinion, has the strongest genetic basis. And at the same time, it's a personality characteristics which can be very easily changed. And from that knowledge, I argue that the brain circuits who run these genetically determined personality traits can be easily changed by certainly strong environmental change. If your father lived in the US and you were raised in the US, even separated from your father, the chance that you become different is very low.
Yeah. And that's kind of the whole point is actually my brothers and sisters on the other side, they were raised different, but still in the same country. So still with some of the same aspects. So
yeah, same attitude.
Very, very much politically aligned with the way we think. And so it's just like I said, it was very interesting to kind of understand how my personality can be shaped by my environment. But that's actually a good thing because then that means that I can, by changing my environment, change my personality.
Of course.
So if I happen to be an overeater or someone who's dealing with a problem, I can make some changes to my environment. And you go through, you've done some interesting experiments. I'll just put that out there. You've been kind of out there on an edge of the studies that you've been doing. So you've made some friends and you've made some enemies, I think, is what I've come to understand from the book. And you've used this thing called shock compliance experiments. And they don't sound pleasant, but they get really good results. So could you talk about how you used the change of environment or the change of desired effect to effectively almost change personality?
Well, I brought up some examples from my clinical work here in the book, which showed how plastic the brain is, but the methods to change these circuits in the brain, if they are fixed over a long learning process, are extreme, and some of them are now not allowed anymore. I give you the example which I also gave in the book, I think, but I don't remember. When you have a person who has washing itself all day long because they is afraid of getting an infectious disease, and so these people clean themselves all the time. So they have an attitude and fear of getting contaminated by bacteria or viruses, and they have this fear all their life. What are we doing with it? What we did with these people? For example, we put them in the Hyde Park. At that time, I lived in London. We put them in a Hyde Park. We picked up the shit of dogs. They had to put the shit of the dogs in their face and on their body, and they were not allowed to wash themselves for a week. And in order to avoid that they wash themselves in between, we changed them to the therapist. So they could, even at night, They could not leave the therapist, which the therapist blocked them from washing themselves. After a week of that, let's say, treatment, they never, ever had a tendency to wash themselves immediately, and they never, ever developed a fear of contamination or of bacteria. This type of treatment, which was at that time called implosion treatment, is so extreme that it changed the personality of these people for a lifetime, which is now not allowed anymore. If I would do this these days in the US, but in Europe the same, I would end up in prison as an academic for quite some time. But this is the only way to treat these things. Now what are they doing? They implant electrodes in the brain, and they can't find a brain area which is responsible for this type of personality, because there are multiple brain areas, and you would have to insert many, many, many electrodes in many brain areas to stimulate that brain areas and to treat the disease, which is life-threatening. Now, of course, I'm in favor of changing the brain by this type of stimulation, but this is much more dangerous than putting shit on the face of these people for 1 week and do the same and end up with the same result. You see the absurdity of the argument.
I do. But I'm just, again, it was kind of interesting to understand what you were doing was effectively putting them into the worst of their fears.
Yes.
You putting them in the worst of their place and saying, okay, if things were the worst, what's the outcome? And their brain
without hurting them physically.
Their brain actually adapts and realizes and says, well, I survived.
Yes.
So it's not as bad as my brain was telling me.
Of course, it is important that this is not torture. Torture is if somebody has such an experience under forced circumstances.
Right.
But in these situations, there are no forced circumstances. In this case, the brain knows there's no force here. I agree to do this. I do it. But if I'm in there, then I'm forced. If I'm in there, I'm forced, and then this guy will continue forever to treat me, and he will not let me out, because if I would have let these people to wash themselves in between, they would have a tremendous relapse and it would be a terrible result.
Right, and so they got to this point.
Yes, they got the point.
Yes.
Of course they get the point.
Now, the cool part of this, though, is, okay, from that, we now move on to these therapies that are actually some of the things we're dealing with today. So as I get older, I can tell you that my grandmother had a stroke. And she had a stroke, and it slightly bothered, I think it was the left side of her body, which made it difficult for her to do certain things. Now, she wasn't as bad off as a lot of people, because some people will go through stroke and lose complete access to half of their body.
Yes.
Now, you've used some of your learnings predominantly through the electric capacity of our brain to reteach us how to move our body when otherwise there was no way for us to make that connection. So can you talk about BMI as a strategy for dealing with stroke?
I'm not claiming that we have a miracle cure for chronic stroke. I just follow the data, and the data now of our studies, and now they are replicated, show that the best way in people who have the very severe chronic stroke, going back to your grandmother, if your grandmother's hand is completely paralyzed on the left hand, let's say, so far there was no way to get this hand functional in the sense that she could grab a glass, that she could drink, she could walk down a stair without getting a lot of help, and so forth and so forth. Now, with BMI, this can be done. That doesn't mean that these people at the end are completely healthy. They still have some problems, but they're much less. So the only thing we do here, which is different from all the previous treatments, is that we ask the brain to get immediate feedback of the success of the paralyzed finger, arm, or whatever is paralyzed. So the patient normally, if he's in real life, wants to move the hand. So the brain says, move the hand, and the hand is not moving, because it's a connection between the command, which is in the brain, and the hand is interrupted by the bleeding of the stroke. So the only thing we do, we just reconnect the brain with the hand. So we build a prosthetic device, we put a prosthetic device on the hand, and we put an electrode on the brain or in the brain, it doesn't matter where you put it, where the command is created. So the patient thinks, oh, I want to move my hand. And in that moment, the patient thinks there's electric activity in the brain. That electric activity, we then transfer to the prosthetic device or directly to the hand, and the hand is moving. So the interruption between the command in the brain and the hand, we then have transferred the command across the lesion, across the interruption. And that gives the brain the experience, aha, the brain learns by that way. If I have a command, it's followed by a consequence. And by that, the circuit between the command in the brain and the periphery, which executes the command, is reactivated and restores itself. And so if you do you have to do this thousands and thousands and thousands of times with the electrodes on your head or in your head. And after a while, other brain areas take over. So they take the command from the top of the head, and then they bring the command back to the periphery. So it's a very simple trick, which is a daily life trick, which is in that case, of course, technology does that. You have to have the electric brain signal of the command, and the technology then, which is wireless, brings the electric activity of the brain back to the hand. That's the whole trick.
And I think that's just fascinating. And it really speaks to the capacity of our brains to deal with problems if we give them the opportunity to see the solution.
Yes. Yeah, and for some of these things, you need technology. And this was clear to many doctors many years that it has to be that way, but they didn't have the technology to grab the command in the brain and then transfer the command to an external device. And with the new brain amplifiers and brain technology, we can easily do this fairly cheap with wireless devices. So it's a technological advancement. The principles are known since people live. It's nothing new.
Yeah. Now, stroke is a big one because it is a killer and it is something that really puts a lot of people down. Yes. But more and more, we're facing Alzheimer's. We're living a little longer, which is one reason that people are saying we're dealing with Alzheimer's more. But I think there's also some dietary issues and some other things that are going on that are kind of causing us to, if not an epidemic, it's still much more prevalent today than it ever was.
Sure.
So you've actually used similar technology to help Alzheimer's patients deal with some of the memory loss and some of the issues they're dealing with.
Well, I'm not saying that we can treat Alzheimer, but there is no treatment available for the causes of the disease. That we are not claiming. The only thing we claim is that even in the very advanced, and we showed it in some experiments, even in the advanced cases, when patients don't know their own name, they don't know the name of their family members, and they seem to be completely distant from everything. Even then, if we get the activity of the emotional areas deep down in the brain, we see that they recognize in an unconscious manner, but emotionally, they recognize, for example, the difference between a positive emotion to a family member and a foreigner. So then we take out this information. We put an electrode in those brain areas, or we calculate mathematically activity of the brain areas, and then we know when the patient recognizes something and remembers emotionally something. He cannot remember it consciously because the conscious memory is destroyed by the disease. But then he knows that this is something familiar, and then we can discriminate between a positive emotion and a negative emotion. And for the personnel who treats those patients, this is very important because they know right now, they don't know when the patient is in a positive mood, what does he want, what is necessary, what does he has pain, does he has a negative emotion, what should I do in that situation, is he aggressive? And by detecting the activity in these emotional areas, we can tell the family members and the caretakers what to do in that situation. So that helps. It's not changing the treatment, but it helps to making these people more having everybody, patient and the family and the environment and the caretaker, a better quality of life. It's not halting the disease, but it's helping the situation.
And I think that's really kind of the positive message of this whole thing is,
right.
You know, you're touching on some very important aspects of when you get down to those emotional center, those are going to drive more of who you are than you ever really wrapped your mind around before, because when you get to emotion, that supports your desired effect. That supports what you need.
I agree.
To go forward.
Yes, and what you want.
Yes. So the more emotional you can make the things that you want in your life, the more they matter to you, the more likely you are to accomplish those things.
Yes, and the circuits I was talking to, I told you, these circuits of will, or the circuits to drive us forward. All these circuits, anatomically, are connected or identical with the emotional circuits, and they are not connected very strongly with the cognitive conscious circuits. Of course, they are connected with them, because all these wishes and desires at least come to that circuit. But that's not new. We know this since mankind exists. You know, if you go down in antiquity and you go back for thousands of years, this was always well known. The only difference between those times and now is that now we have the chance to make these processes, which are of course deep in the brain, deep down in the brain, to make them visible, and we can modify them directly, and we can change them directly, and we see that these old, in the development of mankind, very old circuits, which everybody thought unchangeable, like the one you were talking, personality circuits. Now we know that these circuits are extremely plastic also, like the rest of the brain. And that's a surprise. And that's the surprise I want to transfer that to the reader of that book.
Yes. So the book is called Your Brain Knows More Than You Think.
Exactly.
Frontiers of Neuroplasticity.
That's what it meant.
Yes, and it is. It's a wonderful, interesting read. Some of the experiments you do or have done, very, very interesting. So it was a very good book, a very interesting read, and it taught me that I have capacity within my brain that I never actually understood. But it kind of comes back to the reality of what I've always really kind of known, was that if I really, really need something, my brain's going to help me get there.
Yes.
So very, very positive.
Yeah, you don't need it now. Yes.
So
if you don't need it now, it's okay.
Yes, but when I need it, it's going to be there. So
you need it, it's going to work.
Well, thank you. If someone if someone wanted to learn more about you, learn more about the book, where would you like for me to send them?
Well, you could put my email in the book or whatever in your I don't know where you want to send this interview.
I can send them to Amazon to buy the book. I can send them to your website. I can send them to an email.
Sure.
Just let me know.
Sure. Okay.
Well,
you can.
Doctor, thank you so much for being a part of the 40 Plus Fitness podcast.
Thank you very much.
I really appreciate having this conversation.
Take care, Alan.
You too.
Yes.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Very fascinating man, very fascinating career, and I learned a lot from him. So I hope you did too. And if you enjoyed this episode, would you please leave us a rating and review? It means the world to me. You can do that through the app that you're listening on right now, or you can go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/review, and that'll take you directly to iTunes, where you can leave a rating and review for the podcast there. And I really appreciate if you'd subscribe as well, so you don't miss any episodes. I am looking to launch a couple extra bonus episodes in October, so be on the lookout for those. I don't want you to miss any of those, so please do subscribe. You can go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/review, leave a rating and review for the podcast, or just through the app that you're listening on right now. There's probably a review button pretty close to the top, somewhere around there. Just click that button, leave us a rating and review. It helps other people find the podcast and helps us get this information out to more people. So I really do appreciate you, and I really would appreciate a rating and review. I spent last week in Belize with my wife. We are actually trying to look for a place where we might do our active retirement. I'll continue to do the podcast. I'll continue to do the training and whatnot, but we are looking to downscale our lives, reduce our stress, and effectively go into an active retirement. And we're looking at Latin America as location for that. So took a trip down there, really enjoyed it, got eaten up by mosquitoes. So hoping I'm not going to get malaria or Zika or something like that. But it was a fun trip otherwise, and really enjoyed the time down there and liked the place. So hopefully we'll have settled on something soon. But right now we're just sort of in that looking and searching mode. But that was kind of fun. And then the book is now currently off with the editor. I'm working through some of the marketing side of things with the book, and I'm also working with I'll be working with the layout team fairly soon here. And so that's where I kind of am right now, but I would really love to have you as a part of my launch team. And so with the launch team, there's some bonuses, some things you'll get as we get closer to the launch. You also get a weekly update from me that will have a lot more information about the book, about what's going on than what you might be getting on the podcast here, and a lot more timely. So if you want to be a part of the launch team, and I really would appreciate having you there, go to wellnessroadmapbook.com. Again, that's wellnessroadmapbook.com. And on that page, you'll find a sign-up form to join the launch team. You're not going to get inundated with stuff. This is just a way for me to keep you in touch with what's going on, have you a part of the launch team. So as we start looking at booking events and doing different things related to the book, you'll be a big part of it. And I really do want to have you on the team. So please go to wellnessroadmapbook.com and be a part of the Wellness Roadmap launch team. Thank you. Next time on the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we meet Eric Stein and discuss his book, Keto Catastrophe. Until then, have a happy and healthy day.